The retirement banner hung slightly crooked above my desk, its cheerful gold letters mocking me now. Congratulations, Sarah. 35 years of excellence. Maria from accounting had spent her entire lunch break hanging it yesterday, her face beaming with pride for a colleague who'd become like family over the decades we'd worked together. Now she stood frozen by the coffee machine, watching Jessica Chen approach my cubicle with the measured steps of an executioner. The manila folder in Jessica's perfectly manicured hands might as well have been a blade, sharp enough to cut through 35 years of dedication and loyalty. Sarah Mitchell. My office. Now. Jessica's voice cut through the afternoon hum like breaking glass, each word precisely enunciated with the cold efficiency she'd brought to everything since her arrival 3 years ago. Every conversation in the department stopped mid-sentence. 30 pairs of eyes followed our procession down the hallway, colleagues instinctively understanding they were witnessing something terrible. I'd known this moment was coming for months. Jessica had been circling like a predator, her MBA buzzwords and efficiency metrics slowly strangling the life from Hartwell Manufacturing. She'd arrived with promises of modernization and profitability, but I'd seen the calculation in her eyes during every interaction. But knowing something is coming and experiencing it are entirely different animals. Her corner office smelled of expensive perfume and ruthless ambition. Awards lined the walls. Not achievements from Hartwell, but certificates from her previous positions, each one representing another company she'd optimized. A cardboard box sat prominently on her mahogany desk, my name scrawled across it in thick black Sharpie. 35 years of dedication, loyalty, and institutional knowledge reduced to shipping material. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. She slid termination papers across the polished surface with practiced indifference, her voice carrying the mechanical precision of someone who delivered this speech before. Due to restructuring needs and changing market dynamics, we're moving in a different strategic direction that better aligns with our forward-thinking initiatives. The corporate buzzwords felt surreal, disconnecting me from reality. Yesterday, I'd been planning my retirement speech, thinking about thanking colleagues who'd become family, reflecting on projects that had shaped my career. Today, I was being discarded like outdated equipment that no longer served its purpose. This is quite sudden, I managed, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. My retirement party is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. The entire department has been preparing. Jessica's smile could have frozen liquid nitrogen. The party has been canceled. We felt it was inappropriate given the circumstances and the need to maintain professional boundaries during transition periods. Please pack your personal items immediately and surrender your access card to security upon departure. Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest as I watched her shuffle papers with mechanical precision, dismissing 3.5 decades of service like an inconvenient interruption to her afternoon schedule. She thought she was destroying me, reducing me to another casualty of corporate efficiency. She had absolutely no idea what she'd just unleashed. The walk back to my desk felt like a death march through enemy territory. Mike from security trailed behind me, his weathered face etched with shame and discomfort. He'd worked here only 3 years. I'd personally recommended his son for a summer internship that turned into full-time employment. Now, he couldn't meet my eyes as he performed this humiliating duty. "This ain't right, Mrs. Mitchell," he whispered as I began mechanically filling the cardboard box with remnants of my professional life. 35 years of perfect service. And they do like this? It's wrong, just plain wrong. My hands moved automatically, placing decades of memories into corrugated cardboard. Photos from company picnics where I'd watched children grow into adults. Awards for perfect attendance, innovation, customer service excellence. The coffee mug David had given me last Christmas with World's Best Manager painted in cheerful blue letters, a joke between us about corporate cliches that now felt like prophecy. Each item seemed to weigh more than the last, heavy with memories and betrayal. The elevator ride down felt eternal, each floor counting down not just distance, but decades of my life. Between the 3rd and 2nd floors, memories flashed through my mind like a slideshow. My first promotion, when James Sr. personally congratulated me. The company picnic, where David met my colleagues for the first time. Training new employees who looked up to me with respect and admiration. Now I was leaving like a discarded piece of furniture. Mike studied his shoes while I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors. I looked older than my 60 years, worn down by months of Jessica's psychological warfare, her systematic dismantling of everything I'd helped build. The fluorescent lighting made my face appear ghostly, hollow-eyed from sleepless nights worrying about the future Jessica was orchestrating. In the lobby, colleagues returning from lunch stopped mid-conversation, their faces registering shock and horror. Linda from HR, Jessica's supposed subordinate who'd been systematically excluded from major decisions, gasped audibly when she saw me carrying the box. "Sarah? What's happening? Where are you going?" I managed a weak smile, my professional demeanor holding despite everything crumbling inside. "Change of plans, Linda. Seems my retirement came a day early." The autumn air bit my cheeks as I stumbled toward my car, each step feeling like walking through quicksand. From her third-floor corner window, Jessica stood watching my departure, coffee mug raised in what could only be described as a mock toast. The calculated cruelty of that gesture burned itself into my memory with the intensity of a brand. As I fumbled with my car keys, hands shaking from adrenaline and rage, I made a silent promise that would define the next phase of my life. Jessica Chin thought she delivered a killing blow. Instead, she'd just made the biggest strategic error of her corporate career. The silence in my house was deafening. Without David's gentle presence filling the rooms with life and laughter, the walls seemed to press closer each day. He'd been gone 8 months now, taken by cancer that moved too fast for medical intervention, and I'd thrown myself into work to escape the crushing emptiness of grief. Now, even that refuge had been stripped away. I sat at our kitchen table, my table now another reminder of loss, and stared at the cardboard box. My entire professional life reduced to trinkets and memories, 35 years of expertise dismissed as irrelevant. But as I unpacked each item, running my fingers over familiar objects, my initial shock began crystallizing into something much sharper and more dangerous. The company directory I'd helped create and maintained for 15 years. The client contact list I'd built through decades of relationship building. The safety protocols I'd written after that near miss in the warehouse 5 years ago when faulty equipment nearly killed Tom Peterson. All of it was in my head, archived in my personal files, embedded in relationships Jessica couldn't even comprehend. She'd stolen my job and my dignity, but she couldn't steal my knowledge or my network. I opened my laptop and began typing with purpose for the first time in months. The familiar click of keys felt therapeutic, like reclaiming a piece of myself Jessica had tried to steal. First, a detailed timeline of Jessica's reign of terror since her arrival 3 years ago. The efficiency reviews that mysteriously targeted anyone over 50. The impossible deadlines assigned exclusively to senior employees. The systematic erosion of benefits, job security, and workplace dignity. Each entry I typed brought back painful memories. Patricia Williams from customer service, 62, forced to reapply for her own job with updated qualifications. Frank Morrison from shipping, 56, written up for using outdated procedures that had worked flawlessly for 2 decades. Sandra Kim from purchasing, 58, criticized for resistance to change when she questioned vendor switches that ultimately cost the company thousands. Then I created a comprehensive spreadsheet, the kind of detailed analysis that had made me valuable for 3 decades. Every terminated employee over 55 since Jessica's arrival. Their official reasons for dismissal. Their actual performance records. The patterns emerged like constellations in a dark sky, obvious once you knew how to look. Robert Hayes, 58, terminated for performance issues after 22 years of exemplary service and consistent raises. Mary Rodriguez, 61, dismissed for failure to adapt to new technologies, despite personally training our entire IT department. Tom Peterson, 59, eliminated due to restructuring needs exactly 1 month before his pension would have fully vested. 17 people in 3 years. All older workers. All following identical scripts written by Jessica's legal team. Word of my termination spread through Hartwell's corridors like wildfire racing through dry timber. By the next morning, my phone rang constantly, colleagues who'd witnessed my humiliation, younger employees who'd benefited from my mentorship, even competitors who'd heard rumors through industry networks. Tom from accounting called first, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. She's already posted your position online. Internal applications only, of course. The job description specifically mentions fresh perspectives and innovative thinking at least 6 times. Translation: young, cheap, and controllable. Linda from HR called next, practically sobbing into the phone. I wasn't even informed about your termination until after happened. She's systematically cutting me out of all major personnel decisions. Sarah, I think I'm next on her elimination list. The picture became clearer with each conversation, like puzzle pieces assembling themselves into a horrifying image. Jessica hadn't just fired me in a moment of petty cruelty, she'd accelerated her entire timeline. The mass elimination Margaret had overheard in hushed conversations wasn't some distant corporate plan. It was happening right now, and my termination had been the opening move. Bob Morrison from maintenance wants to meet with you, Linda whispered, fear evident in every word. He says he has information you need to hear. Can you meet him at Murphy's Diner tonight at 8? Bob had worked at Hartwell for 28 years, moving through the building like a ghost. His master key card provided access to every corner of the facility, and his quiet, unassuming demeanor made him virtually invisible to executives focused on their power games. He'd seen 3 different ownership changes, for major renovations and countless personnel upheavals. If anyone knew Jessica's real plans, it would be Bob. He'd also seen me grow from a junior administrator to senior management. I'd helped him secure overtime pay during his daughter's medical crisis. He'd fixed my office heater countless winters when facilities management ignored work orders. We had the kind of professional relationship built on mutual respect and shared history. Murphy's Diner sat on the outskirts of town, the kind of working-class establishment where conversations stayed private and coffee came with free refills. The red vinyl booths had seen better decades, but the food was honest and the owner minded his own business. Bob looked older than his 57 years, worry lines etched deep around his eyes like cracks in weathered stone. She's moving fast, Mrs. Mitchell, he said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. Had outside contractors in over the weekend, changing locks on storage areas where personnel files are kept. The executive conference room's been completely soundproofed, industrial-grade installation. He slid a piece of paper across the Formica table. I overheard this phone call yesterday while fixing the heating system in her office. She was reading names from a list, discussing timeline and logistics. 23 names. Every employee over 50 still working at Hartwell Manufacturing. My termination wasn't revenge or even cost-cutting. It was a test run for something much larger and more devastating. There's more, Bob continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She's been having after-hours meetings with lawyers from some big firm in Chicago. I've heard them discussing minimizing liability exposure and proper documentation requirements for termination procedures. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Jessica wasn't just eliminating older workers in a fit of generational prejudice. She was preparing for the lawsuits that would inevitably follow. She'd learned from my termination, would craft better lies and stronger legal defenses for the next 23 casualties. How long do we have before she moves? 2 weeks, maybe 3 at most. She's waiting for final budget approval from the board of directors. Driving home through empty streets, I felt the familiar weight of David's absence pressing down like lead blankets. He'd been my sounding board for every major decision throughout our marriage, my moral compass when corporate politics got murky and complicated. Now I was navigating the most important fight of my professional life completely alone. But perhaps that was fitting. Jessica had chosen to make this deeply personal the moment she scheduled my termination for the day before my retirement celebration. She'd wanted maximum humiliation, complete destruction of my dignity and reputation. She was about to discover that humiliation cuts both ways, and some wounds never heal.
James Hartwell, senhor.
Called 3 days later, his voice heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. At 74, he should have been enjoying retirement, playing golf, traveling with his wife. Instead, he was watching his life's work crumble under his son's misguided leadership and Jessica's systematic destruction. I need to understand what Jessica showed the board to justify this restructuring, he said without preamble. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? There are things we need to discuss privately. We met at his estate, the sprawling colonial where 3 generations of Hartwell family decisions had been made. James Sr. had built the company from 12 employees working out of a converted garage to nearly 300 people in a modern facility. He'd weathered recessions, market changes, and industry upheavals through conservative leadership and unwavering loyalty to his workforce. My son thinks I'm too old and set in my ways to understand modern business practices, he said, pouring coffee from an antique silver service his grandmother had brought from Ireland. Maybe he's right about some things. But I understand people, and what Jessica's doing isn't business optimization, it's systematic cruelty. He spread financial reports across his mahogany desk like battle plans. This is what convinced James Jr. to approve the comprehensive restructuring. Labor cost analyses, efficiency metrics, productivity projections. All very compelling and professional until you examine the underlying assumptions. I studied the documents with 3 decades of financial oversight experience, noting discrepancies that jumped out like neon signs. The numbers seemed convincing at first glance, but inconsistencies emerged like fault lines under pressure when subjected to careful analysis. She's deliberately inflating the cost of older workers, I realized, running calculations in my head, including benefit projections that won't vest for years, training costs that were one-time historical expenditures, even office space allocations that don't reflect actual usage, and systematically understating their value, James Sr. added grimly. Client relationships built over decades, institutional knowledge that can't be replaced, problem-solving experience that prevents costly mistakes. None of that appears anywhere in her efficiency metrics. More troubling were the vendor contracts buried in the appendices. Consulting fees paid to companies I'd never heard of despite managing vendor relationships for 15 years. Equipment purchases from suppliers with addresses that, when I looked them up, led to empty lots and abandoned buildings. Everything routed through Jessica's personal approval process. She's been skimming money from the company, I said flatly, the pieces falling into place. Probably has been since the day she arrived. James Sr. nodded slowly, his weathered hands trembling slightly. I can't move against my own son directly. It would tear the family apart. But if someone had concrete evidence of criminal activity. He handed me a small brass key. Storage unit on Maple Street, Unit 247. I've been keeping copies of everything that crosses my desk for 40 years. Old habits from the days when I ran this place personally and couldn't afford to lose important documents. The storage unit was climate-controlled and meticulously organized, reflecting the same attention to detail that had built Hartwell Manufacturing into a regional success story. File boxes labeled by year and department stretched from floor to ceiling. Financial records dating back to Jessica's first day on the job. Everything James Sr. had been too paranoid and too experienced to simply throw away. 3 hours later, I had enough evidence to destroy Jessica's career 10 times over. Age discrimination was just the tip of an iceberg that included fraud, embezzlement, safety violations, and vendor kickbacks. She'd turned Hartwell Manufacturing into her personal ATM while systematically destroying the foundation that had taken decades to build. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. I needed leverage, perfect timing, and most importantly, a way to save the 23 people still on her elimination list. As I locked the storage unit and drove home through gathering darkness, my phone buzzed with an urgent text from Margaret. Emergency all-hands meeting scheduled for Monday morning. Jessica says major announcements coming. Everyone's terrified. The timeline had just accelerated dramatically. I had 72 hours to prevent a massacre. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching the mood inside Hartwell Manufacturing. I sat in my car across the street, watching colleagues I'd known for decades file into the building like condemned prisoners walking to their execution. The parking lot that had been my second home for 35 years now felt like foreign territory. My phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Margaret, whispering from a bathroom stall like a resistance fighter calling from occupied territory. She just announced it in the main conference room. 2 weeks' notice for 23 people. Restructuring for competitive advantage and operational efficiency, she called it. Tom Peterson started crying right there in front of everyone. 40 years of service, and she's throwing him away like garbage. The rage that filled me was clean and sharp, cutting through months of doubt, depression, and grief. Jessica had declared total war on everything I'd spent my adult life building. It was time to show her what total war actually looked like when waged by someone with nothing left to lose. I drove straight to Meridian Industries, our largest client for 12 years and the cornerstone of Hartwell's financial stability. The modern glass building housed the kind of progressive company that valued long-term partnerships over quick cost savings. Robert Shin had always trusted my judgment, valued the personal relationships I'd built between our companies over more than a decade of partnership. We'd weathered supply chain disruptions, quality issues, and market fluctuations together. Robert wasn't just a client, he'd become a friend. He'd sent flowers when David died. He'd personally attended company events, treating Hartwell employees like extended family rather than vendors. His loyalty was built on relationships, not just contract terms. Today, I was cashing in every chip I'd earned through years of reliability and trust. Sarah. Robert's face lit up with genuine warmth when I walked into his office. I heard about your retirement. Congratulations. 35 years. That's quite an accomplishment in today's business environment. Actually, Robert, there have been some unexpected changes in my situation. I'm consulting now, helping companies navigate complex supply chain transitions and vendor relationship management. His expression grew serious as I carefully explained my concerns. I wasn't directly attacking Hartwell. That would seem vindictive and unprofessional. Instead, I was raising legitimate questions about continuity, service levels, and quality control during major operational disruptions. If I had a critical supplier planning to eliminate 23 experienced employees simultaneously, I'd be extremely concerned about their ability to maintain delivery schedules and quality standards, I said carefully, choosing each word with precision. Robert frowned, his business instincts immediately recognizing the implications. 23 people? That represents nearly 15% of their total workforce, doesn't it? Including most of the team you've worked with directly over the years. Tom Peterson, who handles your technical specifications and custom requirements. Mary Rodriguez, who manages your quality inspections and compliance documentation. Margaret Foster, who oversees your delivery schedules and inventory management. By the time I left Meridian's offices 30 minutes later, Robert was scheduling an emergency supplier review meeting for the following morning. One down, 11 major clients to go. The afternoon brought similar conversations with other key accounts, each one a carefully orchestrated discussion between industry professionals. I expressed legitimate business concerns about service disruption, continuity risks, and quality control challenges. No lies, no exaggerations. Just uncomfortable truths about the inevitable consequences of Jessica's reckless decisions. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial surprise, growing concern, requests for more information, promises to review the situation carefully. Within hours, Hartwell's phones were ringing with client inquiries about operational changes and service capabilities. Margaret called that evening, her voice tight with stress and barely contained panic. Emergency executive meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. Jessica's absolutely furious about the client calls. She thinks it's just coincidence, but she's starting to realize something's happening. How are the 23 holding up? Scared, angry, confused. Tom Peterson has 40 years of institutional knowledge. Mary Rodriguez personally trained half the quality department. Nobody understands why they're being eliminated except to save money on salaries. Tell them to start documenting everything immediately. Work emails, performance reviews, client testimonials, safety reports. Build comprehensive paper trails that prove their value to the company. Are you planning something specific? I looked at David's photograph on my kitchen table, remembering his unwavering belief that justice should triumph over revenge, that doing the right thing was worth any personal cost. I'm planning to save their jobs and their dignity. The client exodus began faster and more dramatically than I'd anticipated. Precision Parts canceled their $2.3 million annual contract Tuesday morning, citing operational uncertainty and concerns about service continuity. Industrial Solutions suspended all pending orders pending comprehensive operational review. By Wednesday afternoon, Hartwell had lost nearly 40% of its major accounts. Jessica's response was swift, desperate, and entirely predictable. Emergency board meeting scheduled for Thursday morning. All-hands staff meeting Wednesday afternoon. Damage control protocols in full swing, but the ship was already taking on water faster than anyone could bail. I sat in my car during the staff meeting, watching through the conference room windows like a general observing a battle from distant hills. Jessica's animated gestures, James Jr.'s increasingly pale complexion, colleagues shifting uncomfortably in their seats as corporate buzzwords failed to mask the reality of impending disaster. My phone buzzed constantly with updates from my network of allies inside the building. Bob reported dramatically increased security around executive areas and document storage. Linda witnessed Jessica personally destroying files in her office, feeding papers into a shredder with mechanical intensity. Tom overheard panicked phone calls about market volatility and temporary setbacks that fooled no one. The beautiful irony was that Jessica's own decisions had created the crisis she was desperately trying to blame on external market forces. Eliminating experienced employees hadn't just damaged morale, it had systematically severed relationships that had taken decades to cultivate and nurture. Thursday's emergency board meeting lasted 6 agonizing hours. James Sr. called afterward, his voice grim but carrying an undercurrent of satisfaction that suggested justice might actually be possible. She tried to pin everything on corporate sabotage and industrial espionage. Claims that disgruntled former employees are conducting a systematic vendetta campaign against the company's reputation and financial stability. How did the board respond to that theory? They want comprehensive answers and complete transparency. Dorothy Richardson is particularly upset about the client losses. She has personal relationships with several of the executives who've canceled contracts. She's demanding a full investigation into every aspect of company operations. Investigation of the sabotage claims? Investigation of everything. Financial irregularities, operational decisions, personnel policies, vendor relationships. Jessica convinced them the problem started before your termination, which means they'll be examining her entire 3-year tenure with microscopic attention. Perfect. Let them dig deep into Jessica's reign of terror. Every decision she'd made was documented somewhere in the company's records, and James Sr. had been keeping copies of everything for 40 years. The planned terminations are officially on hold pending completion of the investigation, he continued. You've bought us precious time. Time was exactly what I needed. Because while Jessica had been scrambling to save her career and reputation, I'd been methodically building a case that would destroy both permanently. Chapter 7. The Federal Investigation. The Department of Labor investigation began the following Monday morning. 2 federal investigators with decades of experience recognizing patterns of workplace discrimination arrived armed with subpoenas, legal authority, and the kind of methodical approach that had dismantled bigger schemes than Jessica's operation. I met with them Tuesday afternoon in a downtown conference room, presenting the evidence I'd been meticulously collecting and organizing for 3 years. Not just documentation of my own termination, but systematic proof of the targeting of older workers, the impossible standards applied selectively, the documented patterns of age bias that violated federal law. This is some of the most comprehensive documentation we've encountered, Agent Rebecca Martinez said, methodically flipping through my organized files. Usually we're working backward from individual complaints, trying to reconstruct patterns. You've provided us with a complete roadmap of systematic discrimination. Agent Thomas Wright studied the financial irregularities with a focused attention of someone who'd seen similar schemes before. These vendor contracts are particularly interesting from a criminal perspective. Have you been able to verify the legitimacy of these company addresses and corporate registrations? 3 addresses lead to empty lots that haven't had buildings for over a decade. 2 companies are registered to shell corporations with no actual business operations. All contracts were personally approved by Jessica Chun without normal oversight procedures. The agents exchanged meaningful looks that suggested they understood the full implications. Age discrimination was primarily a civil matter handled through lawsuits and settlements. Fraud and embezzlement were serious criminal offenses that could result in federal prison sentences. Wednesday brought a different kind of federal attention. FBI Financial Crimes Unit specialists who'd unraveled corporate schemes involving millions of dollars descended on Hartwell Manufacturing like a coordinated military operation. They seized computers, froze suspicious accounts, interviewed employees, and methodically dismantled Jessica's carefully constructed facade. Jessica's arrest came Thursday morning, perfectly timed for maximum media coverage. The perp walk in handcuffs, cameras recording her humiliation for the evening news, the woman who destroyed so many lives reduced to another corporate criminal blinking in harsh television lights. James Jr. was arrested Friday morning, charged as a knowing co-conspirator in the fraud scheme. His cooperation with federal investigators revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Kickbacks from contractors, deliberately inflated consulting fees, diverted funds that should have supported employee benefits and safety improvements. The satisfaction was profound but tempered by the knowledge of how much damage had been done. Justice was finally being served, but it had required the near-complete destruction of Hartwell Manufacturing to achieve it. 6 months later, I stood behind the podium in Hartwell's main conference room, looking out at faces I'd thought I might never see again in this context. Tom Peterson, officially brought back from his brief and unwanted retirement. Mary Rodriguez, now overseeing a completely rebuilt and properly funded quality department. Margaret Foster, promoted to operations supervisor with the authority and resources to do her job effectively. James Sr. had returned as interim CEO, while his son served an 18-month federal sentence. The board of directors had unanimously asked me to serve as chief operating officer, overseeing the company's resurrection from near bankruptcy and complete operational collapse. When I was escorted out of this building carrying a cardboard box 6 months ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room filled with colleagues, clients, and industry representatives. I thought my career was over. I had absolutely no idea that box contained everything I would need to save this company and protect the people who make it work. The applause was thunderous and sustained, filled with genuine emotion. These weren't just colleagues anymore. They were survivors of a corporate war that had nearly destroyed everything we'd spent decades building together through hard work, dedication, and mutual respect. We've learned valuable lessons about the difference between efficiency and effectiveness, between cost-cutting and value creation. We've discovered that experience isn't a liability to be eliminated. It's our greatest competitive asset. That loyalty isn't weakness. It's the foundation of everything we accomplish together. That dignity isn't negotiable. It's the non-negotiable price of doing business the right way. Client relationships had been painstakingly rebuilt, often stronger than before because of the transparency and accountability we'd demonstrated throughout the crisis. New safety protocols prevented the accidents Jessica's reckless cost-cutting might have caused. Employee satisfaction surveys showed the highest scores in company history. The legal settlements had been substantial, $3.2 million distributed among affected employees, with additional funds for retraining and emotional distress. Jessica's 4-year federal sentence sent a clear message throughout the industry about the serious consequences of age discrimination and corporate fraud. But the real victory wasn't financial compensation or criminal convictions. It was walking through these halls every day and seeing respect instead of fear in people's faces. It was knowing that experience was valued, that workers were protected, that justice was possible even when power seemed absolute and untouchable. My retirement party, the real one, scheduled on my own terms, was planned for next month. 36 years of service, ending with dignity intact, surrounded by people who understood that some principles are worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. The cardboard box that Jessica intended to symbolize my defeat and humiliation had become the enduring symbol of our collective triumph. Sometimes the most effective revenge is simply refusing to accept defeat and fighting back with truth, evidence, and unwavering determination. As I looked out at the faces of people Jessica had tried to discard like broken machinery, I realized that David would have been proud of how this story ended. He'd always believed that good people could overcome corruption if they refused to give up. Justice and mercy, properly balanced and persistently pursued, had restored not just careers and financial security, but fundamental human dignity. The box they never expected had delivered something far more powerful than evidence. It had delivered hope, justice, and proof that ordinary people can defeat corruption when they refuse to surrender. In the end, experience had triumphed over exploitation, loyalty over greed, and truth over corporate lies.